Increasingly, more and more airlines are going fully paperless with their boarding passes. So passengers have to display their boarding pass via an app on their smartphone. And I experienced this firsthand when I recently flew back in late December. Now, in the past, I never used the app. I always printed off my boarding passes and they would scan the QR code off the page. It worked fine, but the particular airline I flew with now requires me to display my boarding pass using their app. And I don't think it's justifiable to make it mandatory because it takes just as long to scan a QR code off a piece of paper than it does to scan one off a smartphone screen. Technically, if you don't own a smartphone, so long as you're checked in prior to your flight, you can collect one of their official boarding passes at the airport, but that does require you to queue up in order to collect it. Something that you didn't have to do before when you used to print off your own paper boarding pass at home. And I think it goes without saying that most travelers will not want to be so inconvenienced that they have to go through the bother of standing in line at the checkout desk just to collect a boarding pass when they could just install the app on their phone and use a digital boarding pass instead. It's easy, fast, and convenient. And that's really how so many technologies in our lives today have become normalized. That's how they've been adopted by consumers. The convenience and ease of using these digital solutions versus the inconvenience and hassle of analog alternatives. Consumers have been nudged into using apps for all sorts of things, be it online shopping, the use of home appliances, communications, social media, entertainment, or accessing certain government services. The desktop web browser versions of so many things we use, whatever they may be, are often neglected over time, and priority in terms of features is given to the app version on your phone. And so your smartphone increasingly becomes an absolute must-have. Also, many banks have introduced two-factor authentication so that even if you wish to do your banking on your desktop computer or your laptop, you still need a smartphone in order to log in. Sometimes this is achieved through a code via a text message, but in more and more instances these days, banks will require you to download their app and then retrieve a passcode or to verify your identity via some swipe unlock feature on the app. And then you can proceed with doing your online banking on your PC or your Mac, whatever. So a second device becomes effectively mandatory. And again, there can be alternatives, but the alternatives are usually slower, more hassle, and a bit of an afterthought. The priority is the smartphone. The priority is the digital version of everything. And so it feels like very much carrot and stick. That's how it's achieved. The services you're trying to use just work better if you adopt the smartphone version of everything. And the nature of technology is a drive towards greater simplicity, speed, and efficiency. Inevitably, you can hold out for only so long. This has happened for so many things, right down to maybe the schedule for the Tai Chi classes in your local gym, which are only announced on WhatsApp, for example. So now you have to have a smartphone. It's all these day-to-day little things that keep adding up, where you feel excluded if you don't have a smartphone. At some point, a case will be made that the analog alternatives can be retired because most people are not using them anymore. Most people are using the smartphone version. And I suspect that when it comes to the eventual introduction of a digital currency and the abandoning of paper money, cash, the same kinds of arguments will be made. A bank might say, most people are no longer withdrawing cash from our ATMs. So we can't really justify having quite so many ATMs anymore and spending all that money on maintenance, for example. Eventually, they might even retire them completely. And what's the problem with a cashless currency anyway? After all, most consumers have already voluntarily gone cashless themselves by tapping with their debit card to make their purchases. So retiring cash really won't be a big problem for them, right? It's kind of an easy argument to make. Eventually, central banks and governments can make the case to the public that digital currencies are safer, more robust, secure, and other such nice sounding buzzwords. The fact that digital currencies can be surveilled and even programmable, hypothetically allowing for control over your purchases, that aspect of them will likely not be vocalized too loudly. Ultimately, the gateway by which this will happen will be implemented through the digital ID, which we've spoken about extensively, and which, at least in the UK, there has been quite a bit of pushback on recently. However, digital IDs are still something that we keep hearing about. We keep being told that they're on the horizon. The conversation is not over. While they began as being sold to us as something we apparently needed to prevent illegal employment and maintain border security or something, when that didn't work, the argument was then pivoted to the tried and tested, won't someone please think of the children? The current argument is, we need digital ID to verify that everyone on social media is over the age of 16. This would mean that the digital ID would be an additional login layer to access your social networks. As most people these days have some kind of social media presence, which would presumably include messaging apps, then that would be a massive portion of the population. Now, some of you in the comments might say, well, I don't care. I'm not on social media. I don't make use of all these social networks, so it's not going to affect me. But you have to understand that all they're looking for is a means by which they can make it normalized. And then what the digital ID will be used for, its function, can be expanded to encompass more and more things in your life, to the point where eventually you too will need a digital ID, or else life becomes difficult without it. Of course, you'll be told digital ID isn't mandatory, but effectively, it could become mandatory when enough people have adopted it. It then becomes the norm. A government doesn't need to force compliance if enough private companies require a digital ID. So hypothetically, if a prospective employer requires you to show your digital ID as part of the hiring process for a job, how many candidates will refuse? If they need the money, if it's a job they really want, they really need, how many people will really say no? What if more employers start requesting your proof of digital ID? Similarly, what if a landlord requires you to show them your digital ID to make sure that you are who you claim to be and that you're here legally? If a government tells elderly people or people who are claiming welfare or state support of some kind, sure, we'll provide traditional access to your basic services, but it's a lot more paperwork for you, it's slower, it's inconvenient. If enough people choose the easy option of the digital access point, then alternatives can get retired eventually, and the blame can be placed on the consumers, on the public, even though they were gently nudged very gradually through increments and enough time until they cave. Digital ID doesn't have to be written into law in order for it to be made mandatory in practice. Society just needs to be changed, reshaped. Behaviors just have to be encouraged over time. Use of digital systems, much like smartphones and apps, just need to be made a regular habit for the public, and before too long, older ways of doing things disappear. 20 years ago, life without a smartphone was the norm. Here we are today, and whether people like it or not, most people panic if they accidentally leave their smartphones at home. It doesn't take much to alter our reality quite radically. All it takes is the normalizing of a habit over enough time, and anything can become possible when we become complacent. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe to Computing Forever. Hit that notification bell to be notified of future updates. Hit that like button. Remember to share this video out there. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.